This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Anna Monardo was born in Pittsburgh, spent many years in New York City, and now lives in Omaha, Nebraska, where she teaches in the Writers' Workshop of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Her novels, The Courtyard of Dreams and Falling in Love with Natassia, were published by Doubleday. She joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss her memoir, After Italy, a family memoir of arranged marriage. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Anna.
Hi, Mike. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, Anna, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
That's a good question. I have a picture. It's in my third grade classroom. The math books are out, and I have a sheet of paper under the math book, and I'm writing poems. And that happened in fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. And I just felt like it was okay that if I got caught, and I never did, if I got caught, I'd have a legitimate excuse and a legitimate reason for what I was doing. Poetry held the high ground over math. So,
as it does to this day. It's funny. My mother always told me, I have a twin brother. My mother always told us, she said, Michael, you're better at math. Jimmy, you're better at English. Now, I may have been better at math than my brother, but that didn't mean I was good at math. It just, especially as it got more complicated. Like, I was good with algebra. I can hang with a little geometry, but then when you start getting to calculus, and that was where I was like, "Oh, this is hard. I think I'd rather write." And 8 or 9 books later, it's true. I mean, I can add up royalties, but that's about it. Do you remember anything about your third grade teacher by any chance?
oh my goodness. Yes, I really do. She was really elegant, Mrs. Bruce. And she drove a Lincoln Continental, and the doors opened like this, instead of, and she wore some kind of a fur coat in winter. She just exuded elegance. And she put a poem on the board every week, and we had to copy it, just word for word. I have no idea what those poems were, but I remember those details about her. And something about her gave me permission. I felt like I had permission, and I was grateful for that.
It got me to thinking, my third grade teacher, haven't thought about her probably in 40 years. I don't know why I would think about her, but now we're talking about third grade teachers. Mrs. Cole Giovanni, a nice Irish woman. Miss Cole Giovanni. I remember her being very nice. I had a nightmare of a first grade teacher who was a nun. I went to a Catholic school, and she was an angry woman, and she was not, for some reason, she was not happy with me for whatever reason. I was not, and I was a good kid. I wasn't like a troublemaker, but she would just had it out for me. Second grade, I don't remember, but third grade was Mrs. Cole Giovanni. She was actually very nice. Very nice. So did you save any of those poems that you were scribbling down in your grammar school years?
I didn't. My mother may have. I still have a suitcase full of letters I sent my mother, postcard notes I wrote to her, and she saved them all.
Oh.
And she did the same. My brother has his own suitcase, and I haven't gone through it. I just know it's there.
You know, it's funny. My parents, they're older now. They're in their 90s. They were cleaning out my grandmother's. They had moved like into my grandmother's place after my grandmother passed away, and then they got a new place. And when they got the new place, they went through my grandmother's files, and they found a bunch of letters that I had written to my grandmother in the 70s. We would like exchange letters back and forth, and in one of them, it was a card I sent to my grandmother because she was sick. And whenever my grandmother would, whenever I was sick, my grandmother would send me like $1 or something like that. You know, it went a little bit farther in 1979 than it does now. And I remember one time she was sick, I sent her $1. I took $1 out of my mother's purse and I sent it to her. And I'm trying to see, I think I keep it, I thought I kept it in here. This is my passport wallet. Yeah, here it is. My parents found this card I sent to my grand. She got such a kick out of it that I sent her $1. This is the dollar bill right here. I'm gonna hold it up to the camera.
Oh, that is adorable.
That's it. This
that
dollar
had to make you her favorite grandchild.
Well, we did have a very special connection. This dollar is more valuable to me than anything else I have in my wallet right now.
That's lovely.
This was series 1977. So that must have been when I had sent it to her, and she got such a kick. I remember hearing her tell me she got such a kick out of receiving that dollar from me. But I just made this about me. Look at this is we're supposed to uncork your story. Now we're talking about
you have better stories, Mike.
That I doubt. So I in the introduction, I read that you were born in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
So what was it like growing up in Pittsburgh when you were growing up?
Well, my very early years, we lived for a short time, for about a year, with my maternal grandparents. And when we weren't living with them, I visited them a lot. And they lived in a town called Braddock, which is where Andrew Carnegie built his first steel mill. And for the workers at the mill, he would not give them a union, but he did give them the first Carnegie Library, which is still there. It's a beautiful building. It's being renovated. I was there last weekend. So Braddock is just still so alive within me. There, my grandpa had a bar on the corner of 11th Street and Woodlawn Avenue, and a block up was Braddock Avenue, which was the Mecca. It was a main street. It was a shopping headquarters for the whole valley, and there was everything. Very ethnically diverse because immigrants from all over Europe came there to work in the mill. African Americans came from the South to work in the mill. There was work there. There was a motto: "What Braddock makes, the world takes." The steel from there built the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, etc. So I remember growing up in this really vibrant, busy, alive community, neighborhood, street. You know, there were 6 Catholic churches, one for each of the ethnic groups. And so that was home. Well, like I said, we always visited there, even when we moved to a suburb nearby. Very different kinds of life in the suburbs and then in Braddock. But I valued that a lot. It was fun. It was just fun. I would lie on my belly on the living room floor because there was a heating grate with holes in it, and look down into the bar on Saturday nights because there was a jukebox and people were dancing, and it was really lively. It was great.
Yeah. So you lived above the bar that your grandfather owned?
That my grandparents lived in the apartment above the bar. That's where my mom had grown up. And when I was born, my dad was in the U.S. Army at that point. We got stationed in Paris, which was good for him because we were very close to his Italian family. But when we came back, um, we were there almost a year. My mom was pregnant with my brother, and my dad was opening his first medical practice. And I would have been happy to live above the bar for the rest of my life and play with my grandmother every day. But like I said, we moved to the suburbs then.
Yeah, my
So,
my grandfather was a doctor. He was an Italian doctor in New York, Brooklyn, and then wound up in Westchester County. His last name was Fauci, although we didn't pronounce it Fauci, we pronounced it Fossey for some reason. I'm not sure why.
huh.
Um, but he was his I guess his nephew is Anthony Fauci. Who, depending on what side of the political aisle you're on, you either love him or you hate him.
What that was that's his nephew.
That's his
Wow,
nephew. Yeah. So
interesting. Wow,
his brother was Anthony, and then Anthony's son was Anthony.
interesting. Yeah.
And Peter Fauci Fossey is, I guess he's technically my step grandfather. He's the only grandfather I knew. But my grandmother, this was controversial. I mean, talk about controversy. Divorced my mother's father, so my maternal grandfather. In her divorce back in it must have been the 30s. Had to have been the 30s, which was kind of
Hmm.
unheard of back in the day. But my grandmother was kind of a force to be reckoned with.
Hmm. Strong woman.
She was a
Knew what
strong
she
woman.
wanted.
She was a strong woman. She was a seamstress. Wound up working with Oleg Cassini, and as our family
Wow.
history goes, she taught him everything she knew. That's what we believe to be true. I'm not sure if that's how it happened.
I'm sure that's the truth.
She, her dresses, were worn by like Jackie Kennedy, and it was pretty fascinating stuff. And here I go again, um, talking.
I told you, you have better stories. They're
I
good.
know. So it's,
Let me interview you.
you know what? Yeah, I think maybe for the 400th episode, I'm going to have somebody do that. But we have a 50 or so to go to get there. All right. So tell me a little bit about growing up in an Italian household. Because I'm only half Italian, so that, and I call it the good half. But
Mhm.
what was it like growing up in an Italian household?
The food was very good. The food was always very good and plentiful. We were 100% completely Italian. In fact, my parents were born in the same very small village in Calabria in southern Italy. In fact, they're distant cousins, as happened in those small towns. Um, and our immigration story is a little different from many of my generation. I was the first born in the US in 1956. And my mom had been born in that village. And when she was 6, she and her mom arrived in that still town, Braddock, where her father already had opened the tavern. And she grew up as an American kid in this multi ethnic working class town. And she spoke English without an accent. She spoke the dialect, but she didn't really speak Italian. And, her vision of the future was shaped like as it was for most young people in those years, which was by going to weekly movie theaters, Hollywood movies, radio dramas. She was an American kid. When she was 18, her parents did this pivot and took her back to their village to introduce her to the man they hoped she would marry. And she did, my dad. Why did they do that? She was an only child. Um, when she was about 8 or 9, she got strep throat. There was no penicillin yet. This was in the 30s. Penicillin wasn't in common use till the 40s. Developed rheumatic fever, damaged her mitral valve. She became a lifelong cardiac patient. My grandmother began to fret, as a parent would. As long as I'm alive, my grandmother thought I can take care of her. But when when I die and her father's gone, what's going to happen? Who will look out for her? She has no brothers and sisters. Never thinking, oh, she might find work she enjoys and that, won't be taxing to her heart. Or she'll fall in love with somebody. No, the mother had to take it into her hands and wrote the letter to her cousin in Italy initiating the correspondence about the arranged marriage between my parents. And so my mom got there on Christmas Eve to the village with her parents. She was 18, met my dad. Within a few days, she wrote in her diary, I love him. And I did not like this idea of the arranged marriage when I was growing up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. I thought, oh no, your parents fixing you up with the guy? No. But she told me, she reassured me, if I didn't like him, she said, I wouldn't have had to marry him, but I liked him right away. And yes, it was arranged, but in many ways, it was a love match. You can see that in the pictures. And my dad was 10 years older. And now, why on his end, the arranged marriage? He was the oldest of seven. And his story is so complicated. He was born in 1920. In 1922, fascism came in. What I found when I found like you were describing, that big trove of old documents and letters and things, I found a file of all my dad's Italian documents, starting with his second grade report card. And the second grade and third grade report cards were issued by the Kingdom of Italy. And then the fourth grade report card looked completely different, had different images on it, had fascists on it, the bundled wreaths that symbolize fascism. And instead of saying the Kingdom of Italy, it said the name of the fascist youth organization. So that took over his life. And making it more complicated, his father was an outspoken anti-fascist. So my dad grew up with anti-fascist sentiments, but needing to finesse his involvement, or he couldn't have been educated. His father had come to America and returned to Italy with this big idea that his kids would become professionals. He was a peasant. He came from a long line of peasants, but he was determined. He'd seen this class jumping in America and that education could make it possible. So he was determined that all his kids, 5 boys, 2 girls, would get university degrees. And that became the family ethos and mission. And my dad fulfilled it as the first, even though it was wartime. Even though it was Naples, which was bombarded during the war, there was no food. There was, hiding underground in tunnels during bombings. As a student, he worked in military hospitals, and he completed his degree. So this was the big moment. I have here 2 telegrams between him and his father, him telling his father, I graduated with honors. And in those days, you didn't send a telegram just for the heck of it, right? It was urgent information. But on this occasion, his father sent him a telegram saying, congratulations.
Yeah.
And I have them framed because that's the closest I ever got to my grandfather. He died the year after my dad graduated. So there was my dad in southern Italy, which had been destroyed during the war, head of a family of 7 with his mom. What was he going to do? And in those days, in that place, arranged marriages that benefited both families, that was legit. It was common. And so everybody knew what was going on, except the bride kind of knew, but didn't completely get it, And she thought it was a love match. And like I said, it was in many ways, but there was this practical element to it. So she returned with her parents. Within 6 months, my dad arrived in the U.S. They got ready for the big church wedding. And sadly, during that time, as he tried to find work in Pittsburgh, in hospitals with doctors, nothing, it wasn't happening. It was 1950. He had been an Italian soldier. Italy had been the enemy. He was still just learning English. He wasn't finding work. And the first thing that came up for him was at a hospital in Yonkers, New York. So he had to leave Pittsburgh, leave my mom, and go to this job. And that continued for the next 5 years. He was there 18 months. His next job was in the Bronx, next Washington, D.C., Santa Cruz, California. Finally landed at the University of Chicago, where he did his residency in obstetrics and gynecology. So there was that 5-year separation between them, which I always understood. We were told for practical reasons. He wasn't making enough money. She was frail because of her heart disease. When I was 35, my mom told me that there had been more going on, that in fact, within the first few months of coming to America, my dad and his father-in-law, my mom's dad, disagreed about the dowry. So the dowry, this aspect of the old world arranged marriage, raised its ugly head, and really a feud ensued. And that, together with these various geographical locations, created a rift in the family between husband and wife. After 5 years, they did reconcile with good intentions, I believe. But the wounds never healed.
Mm.
I mean, they simply, who had the language then to discuss what had happened between them during all that time? How to even approach that? But they had good intentions. They reconciled. I was born a few years later, my brother. And we are a happy family. I had the sense that I was growing up in a happy family that had this dark patch, sort of a dark cloud, and I could never figure out what it was. And that's what I was always trying to figure out. My first novel is a fictionalized version of the family story, trying to get to what are the gains and what are the losses when there's immigration? What happened? What happens in general, and what happened uniquely in our family?
So let's go back to your writing. When did you start writing? When did writing, like, I don't want to say for a living, because I don't know if at that time you were making a living as an author, but when did you start, really seriously thinking about writing as a potential career?
College, I think, but I knew you couldn't make money doing that. And so I went to a publishing course in the summer after college, and then moved to New York and worked in publishing as an assistant at Farrar Straus first, then at Random House, um, and secretly was writing. Because I thought you can't make money, and I was right. You can't make money writing. You also can't make money in publishing. But that's when I became kind of serious about it, and then I had an essay about my father, my relationship with my dad, my Italian dad, me as an American. I wrote an essay about that was in McCall's magazine. In those days, Redbook was well known for publishing fiction. I had a short story in Redbook. I got an MFA in creative writing in New York at Columbia. And while I was at Columbia, even though I really did not want to write a novel, I started writing a novel, and it was about my family. And that took 10 years. So I stayed working in publishing as I wrote that, because it's not a way to support yourself.
Yeah, no, I know. It's interesting. I hear, I listen to this one particular podcast where he always has authors on who have had like near death experiences. And the cynics are like, oh, they're just doing this for the money, just to sell more books. And I'm thinking to myself, if you only knew that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
maybe you're moving a couple of units, but if let's say you move 1,000 units,
Yeah.
you're not really making all that much if you look at the numbers, So it is
Right.
hard. It is definitely hard unless you're J.K. Rowling or you're Stephen King and you've got those big names. So many people I know who are writers and authors are doing other things too.
You have to,
You have to.
yeah, I had somebody tell me this early on, and I tell it to my students. If you don't need to write, don't. I tried to not write, but I had to. It's just the way I'm alive and the way I process the world and my experiences. So then I wanted to leave New York, and so I turned to teaching. And I actually just retired a few weeks ago from the university where I taught for 27 years. Super grateful for that job. It's been a great job, but it allowed me summers to write.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that notion of if you don't have to write, don't. And it's not like you're writing again for the money. It's such an internal drive
Yeah.
to write. And non-writers, I don't think they fully understand it or appreciate it. They don't know why we spend so much time doing this thing. But it's because it's like breathing. I think it's like breathing. You have to
Mhm.
do it, and you've got to at least flex that muscle and get that story out. Um, it's an agonizing process, and but it just feels so right and so good sometimes. There's sometimes I'll read over something that I've written, like going over a chapter or something, and I'm like, well, I don't know where that came from. I don't know like where that words or that phrasing or even that storyline I wasn't even thinking about, like where it's like it's almost like divine inspiration sometimes. And it's I don't know.
That's a beautiful thing when that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I compare it to, do you know anyone who runs marathons?
as you say that, I'm running tomorrow a half marathon. I'm running
Oh,
a half
wow.
marathon.
Okay.
Yeah, so I haven't been
Now,
able to commit to the full one yet, but yeah, where are you going with the marathon?
well, I'm in awe of that. And I know some people who run half marathons, marathons, long distance, and they say what you just said about writing. I have to do it. I can't not do it. I don't feel that at all about writing. Not at all. Not for a second.
I know.
It's mysterious to me, that ability to push the physical body in that way. I'm in awe of it. I respect it, and there's nothing more foreign to me than that. And I remind myself that that must be how writing seems to others at times. Yeah.
I think there's a huge overlap there though, because I always say, writing a novel is a marathon and not a sprint, right? It's not something that you can do fast. You've got to take your time with it. You have to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy if you don't enjoy your training running, why do it? Same thing with writing, but with both running long distance and writing, you've got to devote the time to it. But you've got to get something out of it that's more than just the output. It's almost like to me, it's almost like a spiritual investment, of sorts for doing it.
Mhm.
And I can speak from both because I do both.
That's
Um,
lovely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're not going to see you running a marathon anytime soon.
No, no. My grandmother was a seamstress like yours. You were talking about your grandmother, and I'd meet her downtown sometimes. She worked at Saks Fifth Avenue and in the alterations, and I'd meet her and I'd see her check in and check out. And that's another way I've described it to students, that it's like, you check in at the beginning of the day, beginning of your writing session, check out, and just put in your time. Don't
Mhm.
have huge expectations for every session. Just keep showing up,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, let's. I know we talked a little bit about the book in a sort of surreptitious fashion. But what more can you share with us about After Italy?
Well, I tell the story that I just told earlier, following my parents and my grandparents' marriages, and then of course I get into my own romantic and marital history, um, because as a true narcissist, had to I had to explore how was I influenced by these stories? And I feel I was, and I wanted to figure out how and why. And when I as a young person, I swore I will never have the kind of marriage they have. I will have what my grandma would have called an American style marriage. It would be equitable. It would be fun. It would be companionable. There'd be no hierarchy, of course. Um, I should mention my grandmother was married at 14 in order to come to the U.S. So her view of marriage was of a very young woman marrying an older man and steeped in the patriarchy. Um, that's all they knew. And I was close enough to see it and adamantly say no to that. Um, and so I just said, I won't be marrying young like them. I won't be marrying an older person like they did. And I managed to stay unmarried until I was 39. And then, as they did, I married a man I'd known only 4 months. He was 13 years older than I was, just like Grandpa had been 13 years older than Grandma. And I sort of arranged my own marriage. I stepped right into the template. At that point, there was the practical aspect. I was hoping to have a child, and he was open to that. And I didn't have that much time, so it was like, okay, 4 months, we're having a good time. Somebody once told me, never marry someone unless you've been through a full year and all the holidays with them. And I thought, well, we had a good Memorial Day. You know? 4th of July was fun. So within 4 months, we married. And what I learned is that it was possible to be calculating. And I think he might have had his calculations too. He was recently divorced, had had a hard time with that, liked being married. Um, but I learned it was possible to be calculating, to have practical concerns in the forefront of your mind, and at the same time fall in love. And it opened a door for me in seeing my parents' marriage in a different way. That perhaps both those things have been going on for them.
Yeah.
Sadly, that marriage didn't work it did for about 5 years. We were hit with some hard times. We had several miscarriages. Um, our work had us commuting, living at a distance. So there were circumstances that did not work in our favor, but I still consider it a success in many ways. I have fabulous stepsons from that marriage. We had a lot of good times, and I learned a great deal, and it humbled me. It humbled me in terms of how I processed my parents and grandparents' lives.
Yeah, it gave you a little bit more empathy for them.
Greatly, yes, and yeah,
Even though you're a self-proclaimed narcissist, it gave you some more empathy for them. But it's not lost on me that history is it imitates itself, right? It doesn't always repeat itself, but it certainly imitates itself. And you mentioned the 4 months, arranging a marriage, kind of, and
yeah,
that 5 year the marriage lasted 5 years, and if my memory is right, your grandfather was separated from your mother for 5 years, right? Not your
very
grandfather,
good,
your father was separated from your mother for 5 years. So there's some connections in there. I guess I'm not
very
as bad at
good.
math as I
No,
thought.
Dr. Freud, that's very good.
That was going to be
I
my
never
first
noticed that.
career. That was going to be my first
Was it?
career. I was going to be a psychologist, and then
Uh-huh.
somebody said, "Go work in advertising." I said, "Okay, fine." Um, so that's what I did. But very interesting. So, how was this a difficult book to write, to kind of dig into your family stories? And was there any resistance from anyone else in the family for you as you're going through this?
Yes to both questions. It was
Uh,
very hard to write. Um, I reached points where events turned ugly at a certain point, and I never knew that until I was in my 40s. That feud about the dowry turned quite ugly, and there was a period of time where my grandfather was so the equilibrium was so off between what he had wanted to do for his daughter, because he adored his wife and his daughter. And I mean, he was a peasant from southern Italy, fourth grade education. He and his brother had had this vision to earn enough money to buy a liquor license and open a tavern, and they did. And he kept that business going for 40 years. And when his daughter married, he was hugely generous, and the family went over there for 6 months so she could get to know him. And his intention was to do everything to facilitate and help his son-in-law and his daughter. And when it didn't go that way, and the son-in-law had to leave, and then this dispute began about the dowry, there was shame and in the community, and that's the only universe that mattered, really. And growing up in that patriarchal culture, he only had a few options as to how to handle it, and it wasn't good. He became distraught, started to drink in the bar, which he had never done before, and became violent with my grandmother. And that was a shock to learn that, like I said, we're a happy family, we're a loving family, and that there was this period of time, it was limited to a period of time where there was domestic violence. It still shocks me. It still shocks me. And oddly, as much as I adore my grandmother, when I heard this story, I didn't hate my grandfather. Rather, I just feel so sad for him, and that he didn't have other choices, that he was, I think men are constrained by the patriarchy in very different ways from the women. And yes, they have more latitude, and it certainly looks like they have a lot of latitude, but really, I think they don't have a lot of options. And there he found himself doing what I believe is probably the last thing in the world he wanted to do. And it was very hard to write those sections about the domestic violence, and I'd take them out and put them back in. That's the point of the story, you know.
Yeah.
So that was difficult. And when I went back to Pittsburgh, and after my mom died, and was talking to some of the cousins she grew up with, one of them said, I'm not in favor of this project. Your grandmother told us to keep family things private. That's how we grew up. I don't think you should be doing this. And I was glad she confronted me, because it made me really examine what I was doing and examine why I was doing it. And there were points where I put it aside and said, I wrote it, it's for me, I'm never going to pursue publishing. And then obviously a larger part of me thought it was important
Yeah.
to publish it.
Why do you suppose it was so important to you to get this story out?
I still face that question almost every day. I think we learned this when we were studying writing, that in order for writing to be powerful, it has to be highly specific. To tell a story that has universal resonance, you have to be highly specific and particular. If it's abstract or generalized, there's no resonance, right? And it's a story that I wanted to put out there because there are still so many who feel they can't come forth with stories of domestic violence, of inequity in marriage. There are still uh, girls, very young girls who are forced into child marriages. My grandmother and my mother were not forced, but that I want to make that perfectly clear. But arranged marriage goes on, and um, people are can be hurt by it. People benefit by it sometimes too, but it's possible for there to be hurt. And I think our story is a microcosm of the larger story of human migration, the whole immigration, assimilation process. And I believe it takes a couple generations for that to play out. And we have huge migration going on now. In 2020, there was something like 218 million migrants living in places that were not the place where they were born. And so I felt the story might say something, might be helpful. And then finally, this is really at the core of it, as my grandmother was dying. She was young, she was 66, dying of heart failure after having helped my grandfather recover from a stroke. I was in the hospital room with her one day. It was just the two of us. And she said, "You know what I want? I want to write the story of my life." And I said, "Well, Grandma, I can help you with that." And she said, "Yeah, you do it." And I believe I understood her to be
Mm.
telling me, write my story.
Yeah. Or
So
it's like a deathbed wish almost. That's
that's
your,
makes it sound very dramatic, but it was something like that because I believe during her illness, the last 9 months of her life, she began to realize that things had not been fair, that she really hadn't been given a fair shot. Um, and she wanted that to be known. She was a very generous spirit, and she would want other women and men to think about how they were spending the days of their lives and their energy, and maybe learning to say no to some things, not being so completely available that you're worn out by love.
yeah. Wow. It's a powerful story. Powerful story. I can continue to psychoanalyze it if you like, but I do find it fascinating though how you pretty much growing up in this country, seeing what you saw, vowing to yourself never to do what they did, and then modeling the same behavior or very similar behavior. To me, that shows we do become what we see. We do choose what we have kind of grown up with, or
Mhm.
we completely rebel against it. But uh,
Yeah. I did. I rebelled a lot. I left home at 17. After graduation, I moved to New York City. My parents were distraught. What is our kid doing in New York City? I stayed. They begged me to come home. I wouldn't. So I rebelled, and um, and I was in therapy. I talked about it a great deal. I worked it out, and I I couldn't do better. I just I can't do better in my relationships. What's wrong with me? And I couldn't figure out. I kind of thought it was maybe an evil eye or a curse kind of thing. And then I started to learn a little bit about epigenetics, and and then I started to understand it within that format. But it seemed inevitable that I step into that template and that I experience in marriage what they had experienced. Um,
yeah,
I felt trapped at times. I mean, suffering through those miscarriages and the disappointment of that. Um, yeah, I would feel so bad at certain points, and it would hit me, wow, this must be how disappointed my mom felt at a certain point, or how my grandmother felt at a certain point, or my father. um
yeah. But big,
so
big, big life lessons for you and big insights into yourself. And You need it. I always say like our time here on earth is it's a classroom. It's not a courthroom. So
Mm,
it's
that's lovely.
thank you. I ripped that off of somebody else. So thank you, Alex Ferrari. But no, but I do believe it. Like, and we learn these lessons for a reason, right? So life is happening for us. It's not happening to us. These things that happen, they happen for a reason. And your journey was your journey because you needed to learn those lessons and share them, and that you did in After Italy.
Thank you.
So I was curious to get to know my guests a little bit more through a different form of questioning. So I tend to throw some pop culture questions at them, and
Oh,
now
no.
you're in the hot seat. So I'm curious, Anna, when you were growing up as a kid, what were your favorite things to watch on TV, if anything?
The first thing that came to mind was that Ed Sullivan show when the Beatles were on.
Yeah,
That
pivotal
was
moment, pivotal moment
pivotal.
in life. Yeah,
But you know what? I was what, eight or six, seven, I don't know. But as that was going on, I remember thinking, this is happening more to me than to the whole family because we used to sit all together and watch Ed Sullivan. I got off the couch and sat in front of the TV like, this is important for me, you know. There was that. Oh, I'm thinking all the family stories, Bewitched, Lost in Space. I don't know if you remember
Danger,
Lost
Will
in Space.
Robinson. Danger, Will Robinson. Oh yeah, I remember it. I mean, in reruns, but I certainly remember Lost in Space and Bewitched too, with the two Darrens. Right, there was
Yes,
Dick
yes.
York and Dick. There was another. He was the other guy. Was Dick too, wasn't he?
I can't remember
I
details
can't
like
remember,
that,
but I remember
but
the new Darren and old Darren. I remember the two Darrens.
oh, and then also there was I Love Lucy. Those were kind of reruns, but and it's funny now. My son watches he doesn't watch them. When I introduced him to like I Love Lucy, he said, "You think this is funny?" He treats her horribly.
But
It's just a whole new lens to see those shows with. Yeah,
absolutely. But she was so good. She was so
she's
good.
such a good
Such a
comedian. Yeah, yeah.
funny person. And
Yeah.
she, little trivia I learned along the way. I Love Lucy, first TV show ever to show a toilet. Showed a toilet. And they slept in twin beds. I remember that from the show. They slept in twin beds in the same bedroom. So only God knows how little Ricky came around. But and then Desilu Productions, so her production company with Desi Arnaz, was responsible for Star Trek and a bunch of other shows. But that was one of the big successes they had. So
Didn't know that.
yeah, well now you do. So I not only offer unsolicited therapeutic advice, but I've got random facts about television shows as well.
I'm educated now.
How about
Batman was a big one.
Adam West? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that was such a good show. My brother, Jimmy, and I, my twin, we used to watch that show, and it was so campy, but so much fun. Because it wasn't like the Batman from the comics. This was like a cartoon version of him. But and gosh, and the villains, Burgess Meredith and Cesar Romero, great shows. Liberace, I
Mhm.
think, was even a Batman villain at one point. But
I
um,
think so.
besides the Beatles, who else were you listening to?
Carole King, James Taylor, uh, uh, Earth, Wind, and Fire was later. The first concert I ever went to was Chicago.
Ooh,
Um, loved that
that's a
was
great first
cool.
concert. That's a great first.
Yeah, yeah, in Pittsburgh at the Civic Arena.
Wow.
Um, all the 60s, 70s. Um, I'm blanking.
That's okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of singer-songwriters, though. I hear Carole King and I hear
Yeah, yeah.
James. I love James Taylor.
He wore those records out. Yeah.
My wife can't stand. For some reason, I don't know how you hate James Taylor. She also doesn't like Jimmy Buffett, which I don't get either. Maybe a little bit more than James Taylor, but I'm a parrot head. Do you have a favorite movie?
Um, Cinema Paradiso is a good movie. Room with a View is a beautiful romance that ends the way we want it to. Love that. Um, Oh, this is a favorite, and it's a sad favorite. Two for the Road.
Hmm.
And it's the maritals, it goes from them meeting each other romantically in Europe when they're young, um, and then older when they're they're just tired of each other and on the brink of separation, but not quite. And that movie always moved me with that beautiful music in the soundtrack. Um, so that's I'm blanking on names sitting here, but
That's okay.
yeah, I love that movie. I've seen over and over again. Also, Splendor in the Grass and Glory in the Splendor in the Grass. Um, yeah, that was another tragic one that got me when I was young.
Yeah, there you go.
What a tragic vision for a young person.
That's okay. That's all right. What if you could go back in time and whisper some words of advice into the younger Anna's ear, what would you tell your younger self?
Wow. I would say marriage can hold more difficulty than you believe and still be a marriage and still move forward and still evolve into something positive.
Hmm. Interesting. I think so many of us grow up with these like Disney fairy tale versions of what life and relationships and marriages are supposed to be. And like anything else, there are tests inside marriages. I'm hitting 25 years this August. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And it hasn't been not everything has always been easy. There's been ups and downs, and we're two people who grew up together. I met my wife when I was 18, and it hasn't always been easy. But if that's what you go into marriage believing, you're almost doomed for failure, because it's not always easy, and a lot of times it's very, very hard, especially after kids come, and financial pressures, all that good stuff. But you're right, it can withstand more pressure than you think it can. I agree with that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Not that I'm here to agree with you on everything, but I do certainly agree with that. Well, where can people pick up a copy of After Italy, a family memoir of arranged marriage?
At some local bookstores. It's published by a small press, a mighty press, Bordighera Press, which I love. They've been a wonderful press to work with. You're going to show a link that would make that possible. Small presses are having a hard time this month because the distributor that had distributed books for about 500 small presses folded unexpectedly. And so now some of these books are a little hard to find, but the links that you're going to post are places to start. The Bookworm Bookstore in Omaha, Nebraska, Whitewell Bookstore in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the other link, which is to my publisher.
I will put all of those in the show notes. So for those of you listening, just tap on those and you'll find out where you can purchase the book. Anna, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.